Resourceful Designer, episode 317, interview with Ian Paget, author of Make a Living Designing Logos.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host, who thinks it would be fun to have a client actually named Acme, Mark DeCote.
Now let me just clarify that I would love to have a client named Acme. I have no idea what I would design for a logo for Acme. Anyway, in this episode of the podcast, I bring you special guest Ian Paget, who has just finished writing a new book called Make a Living Designing Logos, which is currently available on Kickstarter. And whether you're a logo designer or not, even if you're just into web design, you're going to want to listen to this interview because a lot of the lessons taught in the book can apply to any business in the creative field, not just logo designs. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Ian Paget, you may know him under his brand name, LogoGeek. He has the LogoGeek podcast, there's a LogoGeek Facebook group, and so much more. In fact, if you want to learn more about Ian, you can listen to episode 100 of the LogoGeek podcast, where we actually flipped the table and I interviewed Ian on his own podcast. The LogoGeek podcast interviews logo designers and talks about their life. As a special episode 100, as I mentioned, we flipped it around and I hosted the show and I interviewed Ian on his own podcast. So if you want to check that out, that's episode 100 of LogoGeek. Now, as I mentioned, Ian has this new book out. It is currently available on Kickstarter, and at the time I release this episode, there are 40 days left in the campaign. And as you'll hear as we're talking, if you want to get the best quality version of this book, you're going to want to back him on the Kickstarter, because once it's available for purchase through Amazon and all that, it's not going to be as good a quality as what the Kickstarter version is going to be. And we do talk about another book that he publishes towards the end of the interview. And I'll give you the links to both of those. So if you're interested in his Make Living Designing Logos book, visit resourcefuldesigner.com/designing logos. And that'll direct you to the Kickstarter campaign. And if the Kickstarter campaign is over, I'll redirect it so you can purchase the book on Amazon. And the other book, we'll give you a little hint or tease, you can get by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/first logo book. And for everything else related to Ian, you can find it all on his website at logogeek.uk. But without further ado, here is my interview with Ian Paget. Ian, welcome to Resourceful Designer.
Hey Mark, it's a real honor to be on here. I've been following your podcast for years and listening to it for years. So it's really cool to be friends with you, but to also be on the show. It's really cool.
Oh, thank you very much. Now, Ian, as most of my listeners or any longtime listener of my show knows, it's not an interview-based podcast. I don't usually do interviews. In fact, you are only the 8th guest I've ever had on the show. And considering this is episode 317 that we're recording right now, people know that I don't bring somebody onto the show unless I think there's a very good reason. And you and I have known each other for a long time. We've been friends.
We have.
I know what's happening in your life and all that right now. And there is something that I thought I need to share this with my audience because this is very exciting. Ian, you've just written a book.
I have. And it's been a lot of work and something that I've wanted to do pretty much half my life. And I think every time I speak to other graphic designers, it's their goal to also write a book. But having gone through the process from start to finish, it is so hard to write a proper book, proper meaty book. 'Cause if you can imagine that, I can't remember where I heard this, but like a thin book, a relatively thin book, it's around 50,000 words. And that's the equivalent of writing 1,000-word blog posts every single day for an entire year, but with the caveat that they have to run simultaneously all together in one go and you can't repeat the same thing. Like it's a really big job. And I did it.
You did it.
I did it.
And the book is called Make a Living Designing Logos.
That's correct.
Very apropos for the self-proclaimed logo geek that you are. I've known you for a long time. Actually, just side story here. I was trying to figure out where you and I first connected. And I don't know if I first discovered you. It must have been through a blog post or something, because I was looking back on Twitter, because I know I first connected with you on Twitter. Correct me if I'm wrong. You kind of got your start as, I know you don't like the term influencer, but that's what you are. And you got your start building up your personality and all that on Twitter. Is that correct?
Pretty much, yeah. That's where the bulk of my audience came from, was through posting on Twitter, yeah.
And I look back, you started your Twitter account in March of 2012. And I started my Twitter account like 3 months after that. And the funny thing is, if anybody sign up for a Twitter account, you know that when they sign up, they always ask you, it's like, what, follow like 5 people. Well, the first 4 people I followed were clients of mine, and the 5th one was LogoGeek.
Oh, really? That's really cool to know that, after such a short period of time, my Twitter account had that much influence.
I wasn't on Twitter, so I must have met you someplace. Like, I must have seen you. You were doing articles and blog posts and all that prior to Twitter. So I must have heard about you somewhere before that for me to say, okay, let me follow LogoGeek. Anyways, all of that to say that you and I have connected for a long time. We're in some private groups together, so we're friends. And I know that you've been talking about this book for a long time. and I know that it's been a long process. You just said, it's a lot of work doing it. But did you anticipate, like when you sat down on day one, how long it would take you to put this book out?
Okay, so I wouldn't really say that there was necessarily a day one when I like sat down and said, I'm going to start writing a book, and went through that. It's been more like a gradual process. Do you want me to talk through it? Because it really has been like a very gradual process.
I know you wrote a very in-depth blog post on your website, and I'll link to that in the show notes.
Oh, sure. So you've seen that.
Yeah, I've read through that. You went through all the details of everything. Yeah. And if anybody is interested, the blog post is called How I Wrote My First Logo Design Book. And he goes from start to finish, the whole thing, all the, the ups, the downs, the delays. So we don't have to go in through all of that. If anybody wants to read it, I'll include a link to it. But just give us like the point form of, your journey.
Yeah, so I'll go through kind of high level, step by step. So step number 1, I wanted to write a book. It didn't matter what book. So originally it was the idea of doing some kind of illustrated science fiction kind of Star Wars kind of thing. And then when I started to work on LogoGeek and focus specifically on logos, I was reading lots and lots of different books and resources and materials. So it felt right then to kind of collate everything that I was learning and put it into some kind of, I don't know, like logo design Bible of some kind, like the ultimate guide to logo design. Because I found every book I read, there was something different. I've read so many, and even today that still continues now. So that kind of sowed the idea that I wanted to write a book. I can't remember if I wrote it in that blog or not. Like, it's something that's just come to mind talking through it now. But I registered a domain like Learn Logo Design, and I thought that would be a really cool book to do a book about Learn Logo Design. So that was the original idea. And then from there, I started to plan out what I wanted to do. And I was thinking, a really nice way of gradually building this content out would be to just blog. So, take one of the chapter ideas and to do a blog about that. And at that time, I was thinking, if I could do one of these a month, then I'll eventually get there. But, as I said, a thin book is around 50,000 words. A single blog, you're probably talking 2,000 words or so. Doing one blog a month is just not enough. You have to do a lot more. So I actually found it really hard to blog as regularly as I wanted to. And it ended up being more like a blog every 2 to 3 months than every month. So, that particular way of working was just not really feasible. And I think every year, like if you listen to my podcast, I normally have like a summary of the year and my goals for the new year. And the top of the list has always been to write a book for, for a long, long time. And, I just got to a point a couple of years back where it's like, I have to do this now. And this was at the point where I handed in my notice in my full-time position. So I was, going to be independent. And from a reputation point of view, there's all these different things that you can do to kind of establish yourself as, somebody that knows about a certain topic. And, you can obviously do podcast guests, writing, blogging, stuff like that. But like the ultimate thing is to write a book, really. Like that really pins everything down. So I really felt like I needed to do that. I was also thinking about how can I pull everything together that I was doing? Because I've treated LogoGeek as a hobby, and it still is a little bit, but I've been dabbling in all these different things, and there's never really been this uniform goal or purpose across everything. So like got the community, podcast, blogs, got ideas for products and all these, like there's all these different things that I've been working on. But what is the common theme? Not only did I make my mind up that I need to write this book, but it also helped me to level everything out and work out what I wanted to do. And this book became central to everything. So the idea of make a living designer logos. So anyone that listens to my podcast, there was a point where I changed the introduction to something like, welcome to the LogoGeek podcast, the podcast created to help you make a living design logos. Whenever I started doing that was when I came up with this idea of bridging it all together. So, in order to pull it all together, I had to write this book. Like it was just something that I just, like, not only was it something I really wanted to do, it's like a bucket list thing. People were asking questions and I'm like, everyone's asking the same questions over and over again. And I needed it to help people. I needed it from a commercial point of view. I needed it to bridge everything to, all into one. So there became that day when it's just like, I have to commit to this. And that's when it became a point where I accepted that this was a big challenge. This was going to be a lot of work. And in order to do that, I had to make a routine and I had to write every single day for a long period of time and just burn through it. So that's what I ended up doing. So when I got to that point, because of the blogging and because of the years that went by and accepting the volume of work, I did become very aware that it was going to be a lot of work. So when I did sit down to start working on it daily, it took like a month or two just to do a first draft. And then there's obviously been lots of iterations and changes and other stuff. Did I think from that moment that it was going to take me a couple of years to actually finish it? No, I thought it would take a few months, but here we are. And I've, I'm at a point where it's finished and I can go into any more of that stuff that I just kind of rushed through it in more detail if I needed.
All the details, as I said, is in that blog post that you wrote, very in depth. If anybody wants to know more of that, just going to throw this out there. If anybody doesn't know Ian, I'm going into this like I've known you for so long, and for some reason, to me, you've become like kind of one of the figureheads in the logo design space. You're up there with a lot of other famous people. Well, LogoGeek is known among them. I mean, you've been judged for logo design contests or challenges and all sorts of stuff like that. But this book, as you said, it's to create the authority to bring you to that next level. I mean, you've got a Twitter following. You said you started on Twitter. You've got, when I checked just the other day, you had over 95,000 followers on Twitter. You have a Facebook group for LogoGeek that has over 10,000 members in it. You've done a podcast that has, I think, 140 plus episodes. You've been writing blog posts dating back, as you said, you started with the blog post. This goes back to 2012 or 2011, somewhere you started with your blog posts and all this stuff. So this accumulates to, you already had the authority, but this kind of gives you the proof. Like a lot of people say, once you've written a book, that's what a lot of people kind of view as the benchmark that, yes, you are the authority once you have a book on the subject. So even though you had all this other stuff that put you there, now finally you have this book that is out there and it's doing that. It's going to put you on the map and again, maybe I'm just as a friend saying this, but I anticipate that this is going to give you that extra push to be an authority in the logo space.
It will be interesting what happens because being completely honest, I've done this almost entirely because I wanted to. Obviously, I want to help people and it to do well. But as I've mentioned, it's been a bucket list thing. I wanted to do this for me. So I've done what I want. Like, literally, I am just happy. I've got a copy in my hand now on my shelf. If nobody bought a copy, I would be happy because I did what I wanted to do, even though I put loads of work into it. Like, this isn't about, not really about making money or building authority. It's more that, that will be a benefit of it, like the authority building, especially. But it's more that, it's a goal that I set out to do. When I was at college, I think I got a D in English. I never was that good at writing, and careers advisor said that I could never do what I'm doing, and I'm doing it. It's more like a summary of everything that's happened for me over the last 10 years and put it all into a book. So, for entirely selfish reasons, like, I've finished it, but I know it will help people. And something that I really tried to do with the book, and I think it's worth explaining this to you. So the original concept was to basically create like an ultimate guide to logo design. But through reading loads of books and articles and like literally everything that's come out about logo design, I've probably seen it, shared it, spoken about it in some capacity, either through posting on Twitter or, the Facebook group or on my podcast. And so while I was writing, I actually found it really hard to write like an ultimate guide. So what I started doing quite early on with the writing was sharing my personal experiences. And once I started doing that, not only was it a lot easier to write, like everything was just flowing out of me when I was writing in that way, but I actually think it would be more helpful for people, because the idea what I'm doing, so this is the book. It's called Make a Living Designer Logos. And this is how I made a living designer logos. This isn't me telling you this is how you should do it. It's more like, this is what worked for me. This is what's been effective for me. Nobody can question or doubt it because it worked. Whether you disagree with my approach, I'm actually open to that, because something that I want to do is build an ecosystem around this concept of making a living designer logo. So in one of the early pages right at the beginning, actually says, I want to help you make a living designer logos, but there's not a single way to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sharing in the book what I did, what worked for me, what I think is the best way of doing it. And then with the podcast, I can find out how other people make a living designer logos. I can learn from other people that maybe disagree with something that I'm doing, or disagree with a guest, or learn from some marketing expert on a topic that I know nothing about. And then the idea is that we're building up this system where this is what's worked for me. This is what I know, here today. That's, my story. And then I can build on that and create this whole, system that encourages people to find their own way and to just be inspired by that. And I think that's a much better way of doing it, because these how-to books that are literally dictating like how you should be doing everything, that's just what worked for them. And it's quite arrogant actually to kind of write a book like that. So I've tried to do it very much in a very real, raw, honest way to share, what worked for me, what didn't, what I would do differently, and all that sort of stuff. And I hope by doing that, it should be a much more valuable book for people. And I think it will hopefully, inspire people that no matter what their background or where they came from, whether they are, self-taught or they are learning through university, their own journey is theirs, and they can take the lessons or the principles, the things that I've done in order to make a living designer logos, but just apply it to their stuff and learn from everybody. And that's what I'm trying to do. So it's not really just a book. It's an introduction to an entire ecosystem that I will be dedicating probably the rest of my life to.
No, that's great. And for anybody interested in the podcast that Ian's talking about, just look up LogoGeek podcast. I know I've mentioned it many times before on the podcast, but if you're not familiar with it, LogoGeek, it's available anywhere that you can listen to podcasts. Now, Ian, I look around my office and I probably have just over a dozen books on logo design here, not counting all the ones I have stored away in boxes in my basement. Right now, as we're recording this, we're on video and I can see your shelf behind you. You've got dozens and dozens of books, and I'm sure the majority of them are about logo design. So what do you say to people who say, well, I already have a whole bunch of logo design books. Like, what's the encouragement for them? Like, I know you've talked a lot about, your journey and all that, but what's in it for the people for them to want to pick up this book if they already have a whole bunch of other books on logo design?
Yeah, sure. So I've very much taken this into consideration because, like I said, the original idea that I had, there's literally 1,000 books like that. So something that I've tried to do, and I briefly mentioned this already, is to share the processes and the approach that I've taken to, like, my thinking behind logo design, how I work with clients, my process, the reason why I've decided that process, how I work out prices, how I built up a reputation, all of that sort of stuff. So it's, a lot of stuff that I haven't necessarily gone into detail on my podcast. But the idea is that this isn't really primarily a book about logos, because that's been done 1,000 times. Like, if you want to learn the process for logo design, there is literally 1,000 books out there. Yes, you can learn this from this book, but that's not the main thing. The main sort of topics are getting clients, getting leads, turning those leads into sales, building authority, building reputation, being able to continue things ongoing, growing that business, stuff like that, and as I mentioned, it's all from my personal perspective. So I've been fortunate with my career that I've, worked in-house with teams. I've then became a creative director for a company for around 11 years. And on the side of that, I started building something for fun I didn't think would become anything. And now I still find it so weird that people like yourself see me as an influencer. It's really strange because you can do all of these things, and I speak about this in the book, and it builds up this credibility and this reputation, and you kind of build up this name for yourself and this entity that's kind of almost bigger than you. And I talk a lot about that in my book. And I know this is a book that nobody else could write. There is not a single person on the entire planet that can write this book, because the idea is that it is very specific and very unique to me. And I'm sharing what I did, what's worked for me. And I've been as honest as possible. Like, I've spoken about things that did work, things that didn't work, things that didn't go well, and all that sort of stuff. For starters, it's completely different to any other logo book that's out there. Also, the title suggests it's more focused on making a living as a logo designer rather than trying to become like a millionaire or something like that. Because I've been really fortunate that I built almost like a lifestyle thing, because I'm in this really good position, and I'm really lucky that I'm able to do this. But I spend half of my time with my daughter, and I don't pay for childcare or use nursery or anything like that. I literally spend half of my time with her, and I'm able to watch her grow. Like, I was able to see like her first steps. I haven't missed anything from my daughter growing up. And unless you're in the position where you have built your own brand and built a company, whether that be logo design or whatever, that's stuff that I'm explaining in this book that I've been able to do. And not many people are in the position to do that, but I believe that anyone can do that. So even though like it's specifically about logo design, actually, I think anyone else that's doing even web design or, any other area of graphic design or even business, they can probably learn a lot from this, because it's, only maybe like 1/3 of it is logo design. And then the rest of it is pretty much building a business in the way that I did it. Whether that's the right way or not, I'm not saying it's the right way. I'm not saying this is the way to do it. It's more, this is what worked for me. And hopefully by reading that, you might be able to take some lessons away and, make a living designer logos for yourself.
That is wonderful, Ian. And as listeners of Resourceful Designer know, that's exactly what I've been doing with this podcast. I share my experiences, my stories, what I've done, my successes, my failures, because I want people, my listeners, this is the whole point of Resourceful Designer, is to help people start and run a successful design business. And whether that's graphic design, web design, logo design, I've got listeners that do trade show design. There's some that are animators. There's some that are illustrators, like all across the board, but we're all in that creative niche. Ian was kind enough to give me an advance copy. The book is not actually available right now. We're going to get to that in a little bit. It is available to support on Kickstarter, and we'll get to that in a minute. But Ian was nice enough to give me an advance copy of the book for me to look through. And I can tell you that this book covers so much more than many of the other logo design books that I have, because as Ian pointed out, He does touch about logo design. He talks about his process. He talks about the tool he uses and how he goes about, and what's important, what's not important, things to look for in logo, and even some things that most logo designers don't even think of, like the nuances of making a logo, taking a logo from good to exceptional. That's all covered in this book. But there's also so much more about going beyond the process of the logos to, as he said, attracting clients. You talk about contracts, you talk about proposals, you talk about presenting to the client, you talk about winning clients over, networking. Like, it's so much more than just logos. It's, the title states, it's how to make a living designing logos. And you mentioned earlier when we were talking about a thin book. This is not a thin book. This is like 330 pages. And it's not 330 pages. Like, I have some books that are beautiful, beautiful logo design books, but the majority of the book is comprised of images. This is not images. Like, you put a few images here and there to explain a point, but most of it is just you explaining to people your process, how it worked for you, and how they can incorporate it into their lives in order to build a successful business.
Correct.
Now, this book is beautiful in its layout. It's interspersed with some amazing original logo designs done by you, Ian. Some stuff I've seen in the past, some I hadn't seen before.
Some of it I've never shared previously.
Yeah. Oh, some beautiful work. But, you look as you're going through the book and you see these pages and you go, wow, what a beautiful logo. And it's like at the bottom of the page, each one of them designed by Ian. I just think this is something that anybody, whether if they're an exclusive logo designer or anybody who's starting a design business in any form, as you said, I think it's valuable for them. It can give them some great information, and it's definitely worth picking up. Now, with that said, I did tease about the Kickstarter. Why don't you explain why you decided to go that route?
Sure. Okay, so everything that I'm doing is entirely independent. So I'm not using a publisher. You tend to find that most graphic designers that are releasing books are invited by a publisher who will then distribute it, edit it, and all that sort of stuff. But I've done this entirely myself. Throughout the last 2-3 years or so, not only have I been writing a book, but I've also been looking into how can I get this out there. And something that really excited me, and one of the reasons why I really started pushing, is because there is, and I'll talk through this on the assumption that people don't know about it, but there is something called print on demand. So a lot of books through websites like Amazon, when you buy a book, it doesn't exist. There is no stock. It's not on the shelf. It's not stored anywhere. Basically, what happens is Amazon will print that, make the book, and then send it to you. And this is print on demand. So there are no like upfront print costs or anything like that. Which is kind of revolutionary, really. I mean, this has been around for a long time, but like the more traditional way of publishing used to be very expensive because the average person would write it, then they would need to hire like a graphic designer, an editor, and then they would need a publisher. They would have to prepay for like bulk orders and then distribute it and everything like that. But now, print on demand, it's literally all free. You create the files, you stick it on a website, and I'll talk through those shortly. And then if somebody orders it, they fulfill it all and they give you percentage of the profits. So this is all great. This is all exciting. And there were 2 companies that I ended up looking at. There is Amazon KDP. So KDP is Kindle Direct Publishing. So that's publishing directly with Amazon. And then the other one that I was looking at was Ingram Spark. And at the time of doing my research, and this has actually changed now, at the time of doing my research, if you wanted a hardback book, KDP couldn't do that 2 years ago. They can now. Also, Ingram Spark, if you want your book to be in bookshops, libraries, and all that sort of stuff, if you was to go through Amazon KDP, and I think this has changed again now, you could only ever sell it on Amazon directly if you went through Amazon KDP. So originally I was looking at Ingram Spark because they sold it through Amazon still, but then they also allowed you to distribute it to bookshops and stuff like that. So I was looking at these 2, and at the point of nearly finishing it, I ended up getting samples. So I think all graphic designers are the same. They're slightly impatient and they just want to see like a physical book. So as soon as I like finished creating it, even though it hadn't been like proofread and stuff like that. I wanted a real copy. So as soon as I could order one, I did. So I ended up getting a copy from Ingram Spark and a copy from Amazon. And that was very exciting. And in that blog that you mentioned, there's a video of me. I literally just got home with my daughter. She'd unwrapped a load of presents and I had those 2 parcels. And I'm like, I really want to open these, but I feel only right that I record it. So I just chucked down my phone on the side and unwrapped them. And I think you can see my excitement in the video if you go through that. But yeah, so the downside to print on demand, having seen the samples, and there are quite a few. First of all, the quality is satisfactory. Like, it's not the most amazing print quality. I would say that of the two, Amazon is actually better quality than Ingram Spark. Like, there's a couple of pages that are slightly blurry. And if you're a graphic designer, and it's going to be graphic designers reading this, those blurry pages, I would send that back. But do you know what happens when you order a print on demand book and you send it back? It gets thrown away and the person that wrote the book has to pay for it. It gets taken out of their profit. So literally, it's really awful system from that point of view. So, you know, I'm not happy with the quality from Ingram Spark. I think Amazon is fine. But then also from a pricing point of view, it's impossible to compete with any of the books from publishers. Because if you can imagine, publishers are printing, I don't know how many, hundreds or thousands, probably hundreds realistically. So they're able to bring like the prices down to like 20, 25 pounds for a book. But in order to make even 50p profit, I have to sell it at over 30 pounds just to make 50p per copy sold. And that's just because, you know, the print costs are high and these companies obviously take a big chunk out of it. And, you know, you get this tiny amount. Like I said, I haven't done this for money. So that doesn't really matter to me. So the main concern for me is just quality. And the only real way that I can get around this is to either work with a publisher or to get a bulk lot ordered. So I started to get quotes from companies, and like, say if I was to order up 100 copies, not only will it be better quality, but I can actually make them cheaper too. Like, cheaper for me, but cheaper for people that want a copy too. Like, rather than selling it for like 35 pounds or whatever that it would need to be on Amazon, I can sell it for like 30 pounds. And I make a little bit of profit on that as well. So it's just, you know, much better. So what I thought I would do is, because I know that there's a lot of people that wanted a copy, that want to support it, that, you know, friends, family, you know, people that have been following me for a long time, they really wanted a copy. And it'd be really nice if I can get them like a proper copy that feels like a proper graphic design book, that's got like embossing on the cover. Like, you know, for me, again, selfish reasons, I want to write a book and I want it to look like all the other graphic design books that are like done properly. But also I want to be able to give people that actually buy a book a decent copy that's not like blurry or anything like that. So I looked into the cost, and literally after finding it out, I just sat down and created a Kickstarter campaign. Literally, there was no thinking about it. I sat down, it was like 10 p.m. I was really tired, but I'm like, I have to do this because I don't have any other time. Because, you know, like I said, at the moment, I juggle my time between half my time looking after my daughter, who never goes to bed on time, by the way. So I don't have time even after she's gone to bed, you know, and then the rest of the time I need to do my client work. So, you know, it's either dedicate time to making money or dedicate time to care of my daughter. So anything like writing a book or writing a blog, building my website, promoting any of my own stuff, podcasting, none of that makes any money. I mean, not directly, you know, you have to do a load of work to get any income from it. So, you know, once I decided I want to do it, like I said, it was about 10 o'clock. I just sat down and did it. I just sat down and wrote, I got pictures, put it all together. I know that you're supposed to have like a nice fancy video. I just literally took my phone, put it on a tripod and recorded something. I recorded it like 10 times and then edited that out. And I just put it out there and did it that way. And, you know, I've added a couple of other benefits. So not only can you get like the book, but if you want a signed copy, which I still find strange that people want a signed copy, but if you want a signed copy, you can get them, because obviously I'm ordering bulk. I'm going to be handling each one. So if you want it signed, you know, that's an extra thing that you can add on. Something that you can do when you launch a Kickstarter campaign is that you have your initial goal. And I was really lucky that in like 12 hours, I hit that goal. But something I've been working towards is stretch goals, because obviously more people that buy books, the cheaper in theory they will be to order up. So I can justify adding on extras. This isn't about making money. This is about getting out the best quality version of the book. So the more people that back the campaign, the more value that each backer of a hard copy of the book will get. So, I'm not far away from hitting the goal to do like a little pin badge and bookmark. And there's another goal where I'll do like an audiobook version. That doesn't currently exist, but I think that would be fun to do. So if I hit a certain goal, then not only do you get like a book, but you get pin badge, bookmark, and an audiobook version. And I stress this is cheaper with the exception of postage, which people have to pay that, and I can't compete with Amazon. With the exception of postage, this is all cheaper than it would have been for a copy on Amazon. So it's just really nice that, better quality, offer more value. For me, it's an absolute no-brainer to launch it on Kickstarter, even though I miss out on the vanity metrics of getting a bestseller. Because based on the volume of sales through Kickstarter, this book would be a number one bestseller in the logo design category. But I'm not able to say that because it hasn't done that.
Well, at the time that we're recording this right now, I just opened up the Kickstarter page. You have 108 backers, and you are almost quadruple your initial goal. You're about $350 or £350, away of that goal with the pin. And I really want that because I'm a backer and I've been eyeing those LogoGeek pins for a long time. I want one.
I'll probably get some new ones made up. So I don't think I have quite enough to fulfill that many.
Yeah, you're approaching that. And at the time that this episode released, there's still going to be just over 40 days left of the campaign. So if anybody listening wants to get, as Ian said, a better copy, because Ian, after this initial Kickstarter, then the book will be available on Amazon at that point, correct?
And that will be print on demand.
Print on demand. So if you want the better quality version of this book, as he mentioned, embossed cover, the whole bit, then you want to get this through the Kickstarter, which will probably cost you less money than if you wait and buy it on Amazon. Now, I'm going to include a link to the Kickstarter in the show notes. But if you want to get that, you can just visit resourcefuldesigner.com/designing logos. That'll take you to the page. And if by chance you're listening to this in the future and the Kickstarter campaign is over, I'll just redirect that so you can get the book through Amazon there. But yeah, you're doing very well. Now, the Kickstarter campaign, as I mentioned, there's still 40 plus days to go. You've almost quadrupled your goal, but it took off like right out of the gate, didn't it?
It did. It did. I was hoping for that. So being honest, I set myself a fairly low target and I was pretty sure that I would reach that goal within the time that I've given it. I did not think that would happen in 12 hours. Because printing books isn't that expensive. It is if you order one, but if you order 20 copies or something, it's a lot more affordable than print on demand, that's for sure. So something I did was set a goal. If I hit that, then I can get some, nicer copies printed up. But, having hit £3,000 mark and bearing in mind that funding, something I didn't know about Kickstarter, they include shipping costs within the funding rather than separating it out. I know that might sound obvious to some people, but I was expecting that shipping would be separate from the funding you wanted. I was originally aiming for £1,000, and that would have covered the order of maybe 30 fairly decent copies. And if I was to get more, then obviously I can get it even nicer. Even where we are right now, I've found companies that can do embossing and really nice stuff.
Well, hopefully the Resourceful Designer listeners will give you another little boost, because I'm sure a lot of people that listen to my show will be interested in this book.
Hopefully.
Just a question, this just popped into my head. You mentioned the possibility of an audiobook, depending if you reach that goal.
That will happen anyway. Whether I do it or somebody else is the question, because one of the things is, and I still need to look into it, in order to actually get something on Audible, it has to be to a certain quality and read in a certain way and all this sort of stuff, to my understanding anyway. But I like being able to read things in the way that I would read it and put emphasis towards certain things that I would want to say. So I kind of want to do my own version. Whether that will ever be on Amazon is another question. So the idea of releasing an audio version that I've done myself, I don't know if that would be exclusive. I have to look into it. So yeah, I don't want to say it would be exclusive because I might be able to release it on Audible, but that's happening anyway, because something that I was very conscious of. So I've been interested in audiobooks for a long time. I used to listen to them like walking to work and on the train and, all that sort of stuff. I don't do that so much now that I work myself, but there are hardly any proper graphic design books. So I wrote this book in a way that it could be turned into an audio version. Whether I do that or somebody else, that will happen. There will be an audio version of this book at some point in the future.
As somebody who consumes most books via audiobook, I do appreciate you taking that time to write it in that way. And for the record, I did purchase a signed copy.
Oh, thank you. I still find that really weird that people are paying extra, because I go to Comic-Con like I'm a big geek, like I'm a proper nerd, and I get autographs all the time, and it's really strange that people are paying extra for me to sign it, which is really cool. Thank you so much to everybody that has. It's just, for me, I find it really strange.
Yeah, but with that, I will definitely be purchasing the audiobook because, as I said, I consume most of my books that way. Now, Ian, I'm just thinking something here. You've written this book to help people make a living designing logos.
Correct.
So in essence, you wrote a book to train your competition.
Yes, I am creating an infrastructure to compete against myself. But at the same time, there is benefit to that because it's not something I'm concerned about. But then also, I wouldn't be where I am now career-wise if it wasn't for the generosity of other people. So I have this mindset where if you learn something, you should pass on that knowledge in whatever shape or form. And the absolute best way of doing that is in a book because it's kind of permanent, set in stone, and it gets passed down through history. It's the most permanent way of sharing that knowledge. So personally, I just think it's healthier for the world if everybody just shares everything that they know, that they've learned. And as I've said, it's not a step-by-step guide on making a living designer logos. It's this is what I did. Take away the lessons from here and apply it to your own journey. I'm not concerned. And if somebody does actually genuinely want to make a living designer logos, I am more than happy to help them.
I couldn't agree more, Ian. As 317 issues of Resourceful Designer shows, I'm right in there with you. Now, Ian, before we go, I do have to touch on this. Making a Living Designing Logos is not the only book you're putting out. Why don't you just tell us briefly about this other book that you're publishing?
So I made these little videos for my daughter. As I implied earlier, that when I have a free day to myself, my little one's 4, she wants my attention whenever I'm with her. So when I've got free time, I need to get my work done. So doing like little promotional videos for my book, I get my little one to help me with it because it's a fun little activity for me. She wants to do it. She's having fun with it too. So we did this little like puppet show thing. We do that anyway. And on this one episode that we started making, which is called the Mr. Muffles and Evie Show, which is like a little puppet and her. This wasn't my idea. She decided she wanted to do one about my book. So I just went along with it. And there was a point where I asked my daughter, what's a logo? She's only 4. Obviously, she doesn't know what a logo is. Like, she looked really confused when I asked, but she knows the word and she knows my book's about logos, but she doesn't know what a logo is. So I was thinking, this is quite interesting. Like, how would you teach a child logo design? And I don't mean like a 10-year-old or, somebody that might start getting into graphic design. I mean like toddlers. Can you teach them something like logo design, graphic design, branding? And I think you can. My daughter, she can't read yet, but she learns stuff really quickly. And I think, taught in the right way, she could pick this up. So there's a series of books that she's had since she was a baby that are like science books. There are books on like quantum mechanics and evolution. Like, they are complex ideas, but they are taught in a way where you open a page and it's like, this is a ball. Literally, it explains complex ideas around the concept of a ball. So I've had this idea for a few months thinking, how could I write this? Thinking about it. And I was talking to a mutual friend, Kaz, the other day, saying I'll probably start doing this book next. And I started explaining the idea a little bit more. I think he's probably one of the first people that I kind of mentioned the idea. After that call, I had ChatGPT tab open and I thought, I'm just going to type this in and ask it, can you write a book for a toddler to teach them logo design? And it came up with some really great ideas. Then I started thinking, I wonder if I can make images that will go with this in Midjourney. Like I dabbled with Midjourney a little bit and I thought I'd put some prompts in and it's like creating these really great images that would go with it. And within the space of probably 12 hours, I literally had the whole concept. So I had the content, I had the images, all this sort of stuff. And I've shared this on LinkedIn and my private Facebook account. And it's just mental. And I just wanted to make this for my daughter. But a couple of people have been asking about it. So I know how to do print on demand. So literally earlier, and I mentioned it to you earlier because it was something that I was doing. I signed into Amazon KDP and literally within the space of days, I've come up with this idea, my first little logo book, and wrote the content, created all the images. And pretty much it's nearly at a point where it's ready to roll. So probably, this time next week, it will probably be available to purchase, like, just a little paperback version. Yeah, it's a little logo book to help teach toddlers logo design. I read it to my daughter on my phone, and what really surprised me, she understood it. She like, there's a part in it where we do this Let's Find Logos. And she was walking around pointing them all out, like on her toys, on things in the kitchen and all this sort of stuff. And, understanding the concept of what a logo is, which really amazed me. And, it's kind of fun that my daughter now understands what I do as a job. And it's just fun,
Well, if anybody listening right now does have young kids and you want to explain what logos are to them, I'll include a link where you can actually get this book on Amazon once it's available. Just visit resourcefuldesigner.com/first logo book. And the title of that book is My First Little Logo Book.
You know what's going to happen, Mark? Right, I spent like half my life working on make a living designer logos. And then I spent a day on this other little book that AI's done. I reckon it might be more successful.
What you created there, even though, as you said, it was mostly done through AI, it is visually stunning. And I think young kids would get a kick out of it. They'd really like the book because it's so colorful and that. And it could help designers, to explain to their young kids what they do. Even if, they do more than just logos, it could explain that one little bit to them. So it'll be helpful in that way. So come on, people, get out there. Let's make this one a bestseller.
It would be a really good stocking filler.
Great. Ian, I think this is a good stopping point for the podcast. I want to thank you for being on. As I mentioned at the beginning, I don't have a lot of guests, but I think this was very valuable. And I'm sure a lot of my listeners are going to be interested in this book. So you listening right now, if you want to get the better copy, if you want to get the more professional looking one, you better get over to Kickstarter and support before the campaign is over. And if you're listening to this right at the beginning, you have just over 40 days left to get that done. So Ian, thank you once again and congratulations. And I know this is going to be a big success and I look forward to see what you do next.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's been really good to spend time with somebody to talk about this because, it's something that I've been working on for a long time. Not many people have seen what I've done and nobody is really aware of these stories. So this is the first time that I've really gone into detail about the book. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this interview, and I hope that you're encouraged to go buy this book, especially if you are a logo designer, or the other book if you have young kids who you may want to teach about logo design. So the two links to get the book, they're in the show notes, but I'll give them to you one more time here. It's resourcefuldesigner.com/designing logos if you want to get the Make a Living Designing Logos book. And if you're interested in his new children's book, My First Little Logo Book, you can get that by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/first logo book. So thank you very much for coming on the show, Ian. And thank you for listening. And I can't wait to talk to you again in the next episode of Resourceful Designer. Until then, I am Mark Dacote, wishing you all the best with your design business and reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.